I'm joined by Andy Worthington, who's a British historian, author, and investigative journalist. Hi, Andy. How are you doing? Good to have
Yes,
you
I'm
on.
okay today, Richard. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I wanted to ask you a few questions. You're considered one of the foremost authorities on Guantanamo Bay. You've done extensive work and written many books on the topic. I wanted to ask you how WikiLeaks and working in tandem with WikiLeaks changed the way that we look at Guantanamo detainees and how they're held in Guantanamo Bay.
Well, that's a very good question because the release of those files was extremely significant, although sadly only to people who were really paying attention. To try and keep it brief, the story of Guantanamo and the men held there was that, first of all, the US government did everything that it could to keep them completely hidden from any kind of scrutiny. And lawyers worked hard to establish their habeas corpus rights, which was agreed by the Supreme Court in 2004. Then Congress took those rights away, and they was established again in 2008. In the meantime, the Bush administration had to allow lawyers into Guantanamo. And as a result of that, they started preparing the habeas cases. But in the meantime, the Bush administration set up what they called combatant status review tribunals and later administrative review boards to look at the prisoners' cases and actually basically to decide that they had been correctly designated as enemy combatants who could be held without any charges when they were first captured. This was the whole dubious basis of Guantanamo, that the men held there literally had no rights whatsoever as human beings. So as part of this process, they would get a panel of 3 military officers, and then they would bring the prisoner in and say, we've got allegations that you did this, 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 and this. And the prisoner would very often say, I have no idea what you're talking about. That doesn't make any sense to me. Where did you get that information from? And they would say that's classified. Now, through the lawyers and the investigations they undertook, and also through a handful of very good investigative journalists, we started to discover more of the contours of this story, that actually what purported to be the evidence at Guantanamo had quite often been concocted by fellow prisoners.
Yeah.
In other words, men who had been subjected to torture or other forms of abuse, or men who had been bribed with better living conditions, with comfort items, because there were no comfort items in general at Guantanamo. These were people who had invented stories or had corroborated stories that were fed to them by the authorities, which appeared to justify the men's imprisonment. Long preamble there, but basically what the Guantanamo files did was they put names to these people. So, probably the most shocking revelations is that a persistent, unreliable informant, a Yemeni, turns up, I believe, in about 130 of these files, and is essentially saying that people were significant members of Al-Qaeda, that they were close to Osama bin Laden, all of these kind of things, repeatedly saying these over and over again. And this is the man that we know from a reporter's investigation back in 2006. During one of these combatant status review tribunals, one of the prisoners had objected so strongly, so vehemently, to an allegation that he was in Afghanistan at such and such a time and at a training camp or a guest house or whatever, that his military representative, so a military official who'd been assigned nominally to represent him in these proceedings, had gone through his file and then had cross-referenced that file with the files of other prisoners, and had found out that in every case, the allegations that were made by this man were made when the prisoners in question were not even in the country. So, this is the most stunningly unreliable informant in Guantanamo. But as I say, people looking closely, what the files reveal over and over again is a pattern of unreliable witnesses making statements that are simply wrong. But you have to do a bit of work to establish that. It's not something that the U.S. military made clear in their files. And if you are to take a right-wing U.S. perspective on this, they kind of believe that everything that in the files is true, even though the files are just a collection of information that very often contradicts itself anyway. But right-wingers in the United States have definitely used this as a justification for why Guantanamo is such a necessary place and full of so many terrible people. Whereas the truth is very much the shocking opposite of that. That what purports to be the evidence at Guantanamo is just a pack of cards based on lies extracted through torture, abuse, and bribery.
Right, and before the WikiLeaks revelations and the work that you did with them, I mean, the only thing we had to go off of was essentially the official narrative from the U.S. government.
The interesting thing, really, Richard, is that the United States government gave us nothing. These literally were men held without any rights whatsoever as human beings for 2.5 years nearly, until the Supreme Court took that unusual step of granting habeas corpus rights to prisoners seized in wartime. Prisoners seized in wartime are supposed to be actually held under the Geneva Conventions and protected by the conventions.
Right.
But that didn't apply. The Supreme Court realized that men in Guantanamo, who were very loudly complaining, I did nothing wrong. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was caught by mistake. There was literally no way that no forum, no procedure that they could go through to enable their case to be reviewed so that the United States could admit that it made a mistake and let them go. Everyone who was released from Guantanamo was released because of a political process. In other words, fundamentally, their home countries eventually, either because they were feeling pressure from their own citizens or just simply because of internal politics, eventually the home government said to the United States, we need our guys back from Guantanamo. This really isn't playing well. And that's more or less how the majority of people have been released from Guantanamo. So, this information, as I say, is the most crucial part of the story of what these files revealed, and yet unfortunately, many people simply don't know about it. And one of the things that helped to prevent that was that within a week of the files coming out, the United States suddenly decided that it had to locate and assassinate Osama bin Laden. And then the right wing in the United States claimed that the information had been extracted through the use of torture, which it hadn't, and also used that opportunity to suggest that all of the post 9/11 kidnap, interrogation, and detention program, including Guantanamo, was actually a good and necessary thing and hugely important for America's national security, and completely changed the narrative on Guantanamo, which suggests to me, the timing of that actually genuinely suggests to me that at some level within the establishment, and I would say we would be looking here at the CIA, maybe even at the Defense Department, wanted Guantanamo to carry on and still want Guantanamo to carry on, because of the huge luxury they have of a prison where they can hold people indefinitely for the rest of their lives without any form of due process.
Right, and I wanted to ask you as well about the redaction process, because this is something that we listened to over and over during the hearing, is that WikiLeaks were essentially, allegedly, quite callous and reckless in their publication.
Well, with the Guantanamo files, we weren't dealing with any of the issues that had arisen with the other files. We were dealing primarily, the only people whose identities were revealed in the files were those people who had made the false statements, and in order to establish to the world the extent to which the so-called evidence at Guantanamo was unreliable, it was important to be able to put names to these people.
Right.
I have to say, you know, I don't genuinely expect that most people, when considering why people made false testimony at Guantanamo, would blame them for it. You know, the system was so horrendous at Guantanamo. You know, I recall one prisoner explaining that, you know, they dragged him out of his cell in the middle of the night every night for pointless interrogations, and eventually he just, after so long of saying, I don't know what you're talking about, he said, I couldn't do it anymore. You know, I just started telling them what I wanted to hear. And this guy pops up in the files as well. So, you know, I think that process of having to establish who these people were was, you know, the only issue relating to these files where we were looking at potential redactions. And actually, you know, that it wasn't something that arose because I think everybody understood that what we were doing to tell an important truth about Guantanamo had to involve us naming these people. But, you know, it didn't involve some of the issues that had arisen with some of the other files.
Just one last question before I let you go, Andy. When it comes to the dangerous precedent that this would set if Assange is extradited, I mean, what kind of precedent do you think this will have on press freedoms if we're just jailing people who expose war crimes instead of those who actually commit them?
It doesn't really bear thinking about. The difference between dictatorships and countries that claim to be liberal democracies is that there has always been this tacit understanding that if people expose wrongdoing on the part of their governments, then the person who exposes that wrongdoing can be prosecuted because they generally will have broken some kind of agreement that they had regarding secrecy and confidentiality with the government. But that if they then leak documents to any kind of publisher who then publishes those because they are in the public interest, then that's simply something that you have to put up with in a liberal democracy, because it is one of the few things that distinguishes us from dictatorships. And that, I think, is absolutely at the heart of it. And when we talk about publishing, if we were to take a time machine and go back before the invention of the internet, then physical documents would have to be leaked to a physical company that published, which, you know, generally in those days was an actual newspaper company or a broadcaster, let's say. Now with the internet, there are so many other different ways of doing things. But what we're looking at with WikiLeaks is fundamentally journalism and publishing being used as an example to suppress press freedom. If this were to go ahead, it would send an absolutely chilling message to everybody involved in journalism that you can no longer publish damaging information about governments in the public interest because they have used Julian Assange to make sure that anybody who does that can literally be, you know, sent to prison for decades or for the rest of their life. It really doesn't bear thinking about.
So yeah, because I spent weeks covering the hearing in London, so it's so delicate trying to pick what I want to put in the report. There's so much wrong with this case, so I really appreciate your input.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you know, fundamentally as well, it seemed to me when the case was happening, it's not even a real process. You know, extradition actually involves a request, and what's happened over the years because of so many problems with it, requesting somebody who shouldn't be extradited, requesting somebody who, if they did commit a crime, it didn't take place in that territory. So what's developed over the years is a process whereby you interrogate the process. But it was meant to look like a trial, but it isn't. It's a who knows what it is. It's a kind of formality. The entire 4-week process was a kind of formality, rather like a country that doesn't believe in its laws and freedoms, you know, so they can tick a box at the end of it and go, well, we robustly interrogated the process. You know, it's a farce, actually.
It is. It's an absolute sham trial. You know, I followed Gary McKinnon's extradition, which lasted like 10 years. And unfortunately, I think Assange has such a huge target on his back because of the political nature of what he published.
Well, I mean, I don't know what you think in the long run, but I mean, people involved legally in Britain don't think that he won't eventually end up being extradited. But of course, that's several years away by the time the appeal process is exhausted.
Yeah.
You know, and also if he does, I don't think the case against him in the United States is robust enough either, as well as its kind of, you know, chilling aspects. Maybe we'll get a change of administration in the United States, and that maybe they'll go back to Obama's position. But I mean, it's all very much up in the air at the moment, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I'm really grateful for your time. It's an honor to have you on the show, honestly. So thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks.
We'll stay in touch, yeah? Take
care. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.